Welcome to the InStory show. I'm Devorah Spilman, your host, and today I am thrilled to welcome InStory expert Jacice Scissors. Hi, Jacice.
Hi, Devorah.
So Jacice is an introvert and a researcher and helps people clear clutter both internal and in the physical realm. And we are going to go kind of into an exploration and an inquiry into how introverts use the power of intuition. And like that intersection of being an introvert and being intuitive, and a lot of the ways that nobody let you be that way. So Jacice, I think you have that similar story of how you had to shut down your intuition as a kid and you didn't even know you were an introvert. So talk a little bit about what you have discovered in your research into being an introvert, being intuitive, and how that rearranged the story you told yourself about yourself.
Well, I think as I'm researching being an introvert, I'm finding out that it's not the same thing as being shy. And that was a big thing. As a child, I was told I was shy, and I did have some of it, but it was like, there's a fix for being shy. There's not a fix for being an introvert, because an introvert, that's a tendency that you're born with, the same as an extrovert, and there's a spectrum on it. So we all have a little bit here and there, and there's no two extremes, because they say that studies have shown on the extremes, you're crazy anyway. So not just wacky, but crazy. So all of us have it. But as an introvert, it's a way of, you like to be alone because that's what recharges you and gives you the energy. And it's different from being shy, because the shy is something that you can change, and it's a behavioral thing. And growing up, being a shy, being told I was shy and not knowing I was an introvert, of course, everybody thought, well, you can change that. So it's like you're told, go out and make more friends, go play with your friends, go do this, go do that, join groups. And that was hard for me. And it wasn't really just the shyness. It was because I needed that alone time. And so that was a problem, because my family, I have two siblings, an older sister and younger sister. My parents were all extroverts. So they didn't understand that my behavior and how I was acting and my needs were very different than theirs. I always felt I had, I'm looking back as I'm doing the research and finding that a lot of the things I thought, my old stories that I thought were because I had a low metabolism, that I was just, something was wrong with me. It was all comes back to being an introvert. I needed that alone time to recharge. And that wasn't, I didn't know it. And obviously my family didn't know it. So I just, was growing up feeling like something was wrong with me. Wow. That I was different.
Wow. I'm so happy we're doing this topic, because I think that's a very common story, because our culture is so prone to extroverts. And then you grew up with a whole house full of them. So you had no hope.
No.
Well, and so now connect that to intuition, because that's one of the things you were saying when we were talking, is that you're also intuitive.
When I was very young and in grade school, I always felt like I saw things differently in the world. And I now know it was my intuition that I was telling people about. I would explain things or, give my opinion or something. And I guess it came across to other people that it was just almost, they started calling me like, stop philosophizing. I didn't even know what the word meant. So of course I shut down, because that wasn't an accepted way to communicate with people. And it wasn't that I was shy. It was just that I looked at things differently. And I think I just expressed myself. And that's another thing as I'm researching, learning about with introverts, a lot of them do have a hard time. Our brains we think about everything. We come up with all kinds of scenarios. And so because we're internal thinking, that's introvert part. And as a result, a lot of people and a lot of introverts have a hard time expressing themselves, especially verbally on the, spur of the moment. So, and it's sometimes they think they know what they're thinking. They just aren't communicating that way. And that's where you find a lot of introverts do become like writers, because the written word they're able to edit it enough to make it clear, to match what their brain is thinking, which is, we're extroverts, obviously, they can think on the fly. It's just easier for them than a lot of the introverts.
Right.
And so, I probably was saying things that I thought I was clear with, but obviously I wasn't. So you shut down because you want to be accepted, and you look at, if you're always teased on a certain behavior, you say, hey, that's not acceptable behavior.
Yeah, no, it's such a common story. And, I say what's so good about series like this in our times is that you get to have yourself back. You get, isn't that feeling like, oh, nothing was wrong with me. I just had a different normal.
Exactly. Exactly.
Or a different wonderful. So say a little bit more about some of the strengths of introverts, some of what you're finding now that are actually your strengths that were called your weaknesses, right?
Yes. And I think one of the biggest ones I have found is that I've been told all my life too, I overthink things, which is something that, because I'm internal with that thinking and all that, but that really is my strength, because all that thinking that goes on in my head and learning to tune into my intuition is what the gift I have. I may not be, I don't remember facts and things like that necessarily, but I see it in a bigger picture. And that's something that I'm happy to see. And it's like in a, series like this, and with social media, there's different groups on Facebook and other ones that focus on intuitive people, it focus on introverts, and it's giving us to say that, yeah, we do have something to offer the world. We do have gifts, 100%. Even though we can't necessarily be comfortable getting up and talking in front of 1,000 people, we have a lot to offer.
100%. I remember when I started the InStory way, and I knew I was going to be working with all kinds of people who wanted to tell their story, I right away saw that a lot of those people were introverts, which is why they were having trouble. And so I watched Susan Cain, and then I watched her book, read her book called Quiet. And I was so impressed because she was an advocate for how much our world needs our introverts. Like, we
Exactly.
need you guys. We need different ways of thinking, different looking into things. And our culture American culture is largely biased towards extroverts. I don't think all cultures are biased towards extroverts, but I would love to hear, what else have you learned about the way introverts work, and what helps you, and what are you learning, and who are you talking to? Just tell us a little more about what's been happening as you've been researching this.
Well, I've gone through, as most of your people know, going through the goo with it, because I'm learning all these stories, learning about myself, and it's really eye-opening. And I've talked to a friend the other day, and who also didn't realize she was an introvert, and we were talking about different things that we have in common. That, from my research, has shown that introverts tend to do these type of behaviors more than extroverts do. And it was nice to, I think for both of us to recognize we've got a kindred spirit in this. We're not the only ones, and she's very creative in her art, and so there's different ways of expressing it, and right. The talents and skills that introverts have, and we, need to learn how to use these and learn to have the confidence in ourselves to use them. And I think as I'm learning this, it's actually, I'm gaining confidence that I am good enough in different ways, which is another old story that many of us have, but it's just the knowledge that I'm not the only one. The studies have shown that they estimate there could be as large as 45% of the population are introverts. You would not know that because introverts have always tried to hide that part of themselves. They've tried to say, okay, they need to have their quiet time. And there's studies saying, like, with the open office concepts are actually a problem for a lot of introverts. It doesn't honor them. Not that they can't work with other people, because many of them are very social and can work in groups, but they still need that alone time, and they need to have spaces to get that alone time to recharge, to get their thoughts together, get them organized. And as I'm learning all this kind of stuff, it's like, wow, wait a minute. I've been this way, and that doesn't mean there's something wrong with me. There's something actually right with me. And that builds my confidence. And it's like, wait, I can learn to offer a lot more to other people because I believe it in myself. I become more authentic. I'm not trying to be something I'm not.
So true. And it makes me so happy. And Janice, who talked to Anna, who's also in InStory Way. And what I love about that is that there are ways for people to gain that confidence with each other.
That has been a tremendous help for me, because feedback is something that you don't always get. Now, I've had a blog for 12 years. I've had a few comments on it, but it's not that I'm out there commenting on everybody's blog. Excuse me. And it's not that people take that time to comment. That doesn't mean they're not being influenced by it, but they're not taking the time to comment. But when you don't have that feedback, you're really not sure about yourself. Right. Where InStory has been fabulous in that way, because I've put things out there. I will, post in our InStory group, and I get tremendous feedback. I try to give feedback to other people. And I think we're just, even if we're all very different in what we do as an occupation and, our lifestyles and stuff, we have something in common, and we can help each other. And that helps build the confidence, so that when we do go out into our work situation or, interactions with other people, we actually have some feedback to know we're doing things right. Right.
Otherwise, you would, like most introverts and women in would never go on this interview series, right?
They would hide behind it all.
Correct. So talk a little bit, Janice, about what did it take for you to prepare to be able to do this interview? And the reason I'm asking you is because I think a lot of women who watch say, oh my God, I could never do that.
The biggest thing for me preparing, and I know other people in our group have had the same thing, is that I wrote down, created an outline. I did the research. I tried to gain the knowledge of what I'm going to talk about. And I have, I've talked to you obviously on this with this outline, so that I feel like I have a direction. I don't have to rely on that quick thinking, because I know I've already researched it. I've already tried to formulate it. And like I even said before, a lot of introverts, not all of them, but a lot of them have that problem where we have so much thinking going on in our heads that to make it coherent and to make sense when we speak it, we have to actually create an outline or some kind of way of making, note cards or whatever, so that it helps keep our thoughts on track as to what we're talking about.
100%. I tell all the introverts who I interview from InStory, I say, please write down things for yourself. Even if we're not going to go in the exact order, at least you now have that you can relax. Because if you're introverted and you're watching this and you have to give a talk, it's okay to write it down. Right? Like I do spontaneous speaking because I'm an extrovert. I'm a storyteller. So I like to do that. I have the opposite problem. I don't want to write it down. So we each have like a thing that's your style. And almost all of us were told whatever our style was, that was not a good enough style. Right?
Well, I think we were brought up that there's one way of doing something, and that's the right way. But fortunately, things I think are changing. And as you have told us in InStory Way, that we unschool those old thoughts so that we can figure out what's the right way for us, so that we can put our best foot forward, not according to what someone else tells us how to do it, but how we feel is our best way. And that's another thing I've been reading about with introverts. There's a lot of them that do these TED Talks and get up in speeches, and they do very well with them. But that doesn't mean they don't need that alone time to get it all figured out.
Right. Right. And learning what is your way. That's a lot of times people ask me, well, what's the InStory way? I said, there's no such thing. The InStory way is actually finally finding and doing things your way. And I feel like that's so much what you're trying to bring forward to people, is to what it means to actually do the research on what kind of person you are. So tell us a little bit more about how does like the clutter connect to intuition, and because you've done a lot of research and speaking about clutter, both inner clutter and clutter in your space. So talk a little bit about that.
Well, I've always looked at clutter, dealing with it as a mindset. And because holding on to clutter, it's decisions unmade. And decisions are usually unmade because you can't decide, the emotions are usually too attached.
Mm-hmm.
And we don't rely on our common sense, and we don't rely on intuition. And that's something now with my research, I'm really exploring that, because I've always been interested in it, but I've always played it safe. This is step 1, step 2, step 3 on decluttering. But there's a lot more, because you have to change your mindset. Mm-hmm. And with the intuition part, I'm finding that, one of my studies also showed that they find that when you listen to your intuition, which you have to have some quiet time to find it, mm-hmm. but when you listen to your intuition, it is right almost all of the time. Mm-hmm. And these are scientific studies that they have performed on this. And which to me was a very interesting fact, because that's that gut feeling, or that little voice in your head, or, your heart pounding on something that this isn't right, or this is what I should do. But then you get those emotional feelings like letting go of getting rid of something. It's like, oh, well, then all of a sudden you come up with like, well, this someone so-and-so gave it to me, or it's this reason. But yet our gut feeling is saying, hey, it's time to let it go. It's not serving a purpose in your life anymore. So why are you keeping it? Mm-hmm. So those are areas I'm really starting to get into exploring in more, instead of the basic, how-tos for decluttering on different items, but to actually getting into your mind as to what's happening there, and starting to listen to what your intuition is telling you.
It's so, I just find that super interesting, because first of all, I agree, like getting quiet for any kind of person, and that cluttered thinking and cluttered space. And I also love what you said about decisions unmade. Mm-hmm. I think that's super interesting, and that I wonder if it has something to do with people not being validated for their natural way, for their natural style. So then trying to do things someone else's way, then you can't actually trust your intuition.
Right. Because you'd feel like it's like, well, someone said this is the way you're supposed to do something, but everybody's different. Mm-hmm. And your intuition is telling you that, no, maybe I need to do it this way, but so-and-so says, the experts say it's this way, and you're torn.
Right.
So then you don't make any decision.
Right. Because you don't trust yourself, right? Because the whole thing is, how do you trust your intuition? And so what I think you're opening up for us is that you can't trust your intuition when you're trying to be an extrovert and you're an introvert, because your intuition is going to say, stay home, be quiet, go inside, or I don't need to do this. But your outer expectation about being a good or right or whatever person is going to say, oh, no, I have to do it this way. And then right?
Right.
So have you started to feel a shift, Jacice? Like, try to describe what's happening to you as you've been doing this research and getting this knowledge.
I've had a large shift, and I'm still in it. I'm working through it, and I'm seeing that a whole different world out there, really.
And what sense? Try to say a little more about that.
I see really a lot of it with my writing on clutter. Mm-hmm. Because like I said, I've realized I've been playing it safe for a long time on my writing, and I haven't put my writing out there, put my trust in my intuition, trust in what I have to say is going to be validated and be okay for people and good enough for people to influence them. We do tend to play it safe, because when whatever I would say in the past, I was philosophizing. So I don't want to be a philosopher necessarily, but then again, maybe that's what my gift is to look at things from a different perspective and express that to people. So maybe that they may be able to look at it from a different perspective.
Right, right. That very thing that people were teasing you about is now a strength that's valued. And that is the huge difference.
Yes.
Right? And I think that's what happens, like when people come into the InStory way, like I think what happens is people come in with this sense of wanting to be more authentic, but out in the regular, so to speak, world, you can't. Right? Because you don't get any support.
And when you don't get the support, and when the feedback is more negative than positive, you tend to say, okay, maybe there's something wrong with me, or I'm not good enough for it. And even though that's your authentic self, we all look for validation outside of ourselves. That's just human nature. And when you don't get it, you've thought, your first thoughts are something is wrong with me.
Right. And I think you can't build up that new vulnerable kind of authentic soul calling that you know in yourself is true. You can't build up the confidence unless you get what you started with, which was this much more aligned feedback. Right. So what do you feel like is kind of opening up for you? Like what is starting to feel possible that didn't feel possible before?
I think a lot of it is being able to actually tell my stories and be vulnerable in that way, but to put them out there. I mean, I was brought up by, a perfectionist mother, and you don't show your dirty laundry type of thing. And I think I'm finally reaching that point that it's okay to tell these stories, and I don't think I'm going to hurt anybody. And if I do, it's more their problem, not mine. I don't have to take the weight of the world and everybody's hurts on my shoulder.
Right.
So, but there's a lot of people that can identify with my stories, which I have found out, like in InStory way, with a lot of that. And by being able to write those stories and the lessons I've learned, that maybe I can help or influence other people. Whether it's in clutter, whether it's the physical clutter, the mental clutter, or in any other way.
Right. And, since we're talking about being vulnerable, maybe talk a little bit, because you also talk, because you're in the InStory way, I know about a little bit about being dyslexic as a kid.
Well, that played into it also, because not only I was dyslexic, so I couldn't read. I didn't learn how to until second grade. And I was teased a lot because back in that day, back in the 60s, they didn't have the help that they have now. And so I had that teasing. And then when I did try to express myself verbally to people, that became a problem. I was philosophizing. So you compound that on there. My older sister was popular. She was only 2 years older. She was straight A student. I was a B student, but that wasn't the straight A student. And so you start to, adding all those things up, it became a problem. And back in that time in 60s, when I was diagnosed with the dyslexia, I learned to read by private tutoring. And once back then they thought you were fixed. And it's not something you're fixed with. I mean, yeah, I can read, but my comprehension is hard. A lot of times I have to reread things. I'm slow at reading. It can affect a lot of different things. So I struggled throughout school. Even though I did pretty well overall, I struggled. And so that only added to that not being good enough feeling, especially in a family. You had being introvert, being shy, being struggling with school because of dyslexia, which they call learning disability. But it's all those things added up, and I had a lot of teasing. I had just that feeling of just not being good enough. And
at the same time being super smart. Right? Because none of that has to do with not being smart.
No. And I mean, I was a B student. Could I have been better? Possibly, if my teachers have understood me, that I had the knowledge and the capabilities, but with school, the way it's set up, I couldn't, I did great on, when it comes to say with that, writing essays, I was never good at, because here, I can prepare things. Research papers, I was always getting A's and B's on. but if in an essay test where I had to, at the moment, come up with this information, write it clear, I had teachers tell me that I would either write not enough or I would write too much because I had to cover myself. So, I mean, that didn't help. But today, I think that the education system is better with people that do have this. And you're not on a time test necessarily if you have it. And that became problems for me. I mean, I was fine with the multiple choice because the answers were there.
Right, right.
So I had the knowledge. It's a way of giving it that knowledge, testing that knowledge and how it's tested. And that makes it more difficult. But then again, that also adds into not feeling good enough because if you can't do it the way that we are, they think you should, and back to unschooling.
Right, 100%. And that, you know, because people will come into the InStory way and want to do it the right way. And I say, no, what's your way, right?
Exactly.
You know, it cracked me up. We were having a preparation conversation and Janice said, oh yes, well, tell us about the dictionary. I just loved the story. And then how Anna agreed with you. And I was like, it's so not me, right?
Well, when I was a kid, because my spelling was never good, partly because of the dyslexia, I would look up words in the dictionary. And I was just fascinated and curious with it. But the problem is you read one word, you read the definition, and of course there's usually another word in there that I'm not quite sure about. So I would go and look up that word. And then there would probably be another thing in the definition that wasn't. It's like I was curious. I'd go look up that word. And I would just continue looking up word after word after word, just my curiosity. And when I was talking to Anna the other day and explaining that to her, she goes, oh my God, I do that too. And it's like, oh, I'm not the only one.
Well, and because I was just laughing, and to own who you are, like in a million years, I would never do that. Like I would barely look up a word, and I would never look up another word in the same moment. And I would only look up a word under duress if I had to, because that's not my style.
I think a lot of that has to do with being an introvert. From my research, it shows that an introvert is all internal with the thinking. That's how they are. And it just leads, one thing leads to another.
Mm-hmm.
And they also have, I think, can sit still longer by themselves looking at a dictionary from one word to the other, as opposed to somebody who likes to be out in, the extroverts get their energy from being in communication with other people.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's
and
external.
Also that spontaneous, like I'm like the opposite. Like I always want to just be spontaneous. And when I have to go write it down exactly, that's harder for me.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So then I feel, what's wrong with me that I can't write it down? And you're like, oh, what's wrong with me that I can't be spontaneous?
Exactly.
Right. Which is all to say, right?
Yeah. We each have our specialties, and they really need to be valued and respected. And acknowledged. And I think it's very important that people learn that being an introvert isn't just being a shy person, because there's a lot of people who are not shy and you would never know they were an introvert.
Right.
But they need that alone time to get all their thoughts together.
Exactly. And I think also introverts need the kind of safety of support to be able to build a new level of confidence in that what you have to say does matter, is clear, is powerful, and that your way of communicating doesn't change the quality of the communication.
Exactly.
Right. So that's really a big, goal. I think that's why I have quite a few introverts in the InStory way, because it's such a supportive place, and why I work really hard on what is it like to be an introvert. So Janice, tell us a little bit about your free gift and how it can help people who are dealing with some of this.
Well, my free gift is I've just created a little paper, I guess it is, on, and I call it a decision guide on sentimental items. It's because sentimental items are more difficult to declutter than average items. And it's got a list of a lot of questions, and that gets into that thinking of why are we keeping it, and it's actually, I'm trying to get it where the questions will let you realize the difference between your emotional strings that hold you to that clutter, and also deep dig into your intuition, because most of the time our gut feeling says, don't keep this. But then our emotions kick in. It's like, well, so-and-so gave it to me, or it's inherited or whatever. How can I let it go? And there are ways that you can do things to still preserve the memories, but let go of the item if that item isn't serving you anymore. And one big example I had was I had a Trendle sewing machine that was my grandmother's, and I had not used it. My parents had had it. They got it from her, and they had it for many years. And when my mother was moved to a nursing home a few years ago, is I moved it to my house thinking I'm a sewer, so I'm going to try using it. And I never did. And it just sat there. And it's like, it finally reached a point like, enough is enough. I need to get rid of it. And last summer I finally did, but I took pictures of it. And when I need those memories, I have it. And actually my grandmother had all these wooden spools of thread in the drawers in it, had material that she cut off from her pants. My mother had this sewing machine for 30 years and never looked in those drawers because she was a knitter, not a sewer. It just was sitting in her bedroom, and she used it as a piece of furniture to display stuff on. And I took pictures of all that. I took those wooden spools, I put them in a glass jar. I have them by my sewing machine, which is a more modern sewing machine. And I ended up selling that. And I haven't regretted it. At times I think, oh, I miss that, and I'll go look at the picture, at the photo. And so the memories are still there, but it wasn't serving a purpose in my house anymore. We had redone some remodeling, and it just had no place to go. So it ended up sitting in my laundry room for like, I think about 10 months. And it's like, this is not, necessary to keep it. But I had to let go of it mentally before I could let go of it physically. And this freebie that I have has a lot of questions on them to help you try to get past those emotions and start learning to listen to your intuition that maybe it's time to let it go. And if you do want to keep it, it also has ideas on how to honor that, because if it's packed away in a box, you're not honoring the memory or the item.
Right. So good, Janice. Such an important work, because it's a super hard area for all of us. Many of us have had parents that have left this world and left very precious items, and what do we do with them? So it's a great topic. So grab Janice's free gift, take some time and see where it applies. And, look, right now we're in this whole time we're all home. It's during this coronavirus and we're home. So maybe it's a moment where for somebody right now in this moment, that's going to make a difference. That you're going to be able to just trust that intuitive feeling about letting something go. I don't know, but trust it. I feel like it's metaphorical too about deciding other things. So I think if you get it and you ask yourself that question, you can apply it to other areas of your life. And I think you'll find it significant. So Janice, share just the last few words of inspiration, benefits from InStory, things that will inspire other people before we wrap up.
Well, I think it's that old saying that knowledge is power. And as I'm doing this research and finding out more about myself and my being an introvert, finding out more about intuition, that this knowledge is opening up the ideas that a lot of my old stories were really wrong. I've interpreted them wrong. And being in InStory way has helped me see that, because there's other people. And I think that the power of social media is that you can find groups of people that have similarities to you. You're not alone with it. And, just getting that knowledge can really open up doors and open up your mind into a lot more possibilities.
Yes. And if you are an introvert, you'll have this free gift from Janice. You'll be able to connect with her in the InStory show, in the InStory World Facebook group. But don't sit alone with those I'm not good enough feelings. Reach out. I mean, that, Janice, you've proved that so strongly that, even as an introvert, making those connections makes a huge difference. Like, I want everybody watching not to live in your old stories anymore. And Janice, I want to just honor you so much for living that vulnerable share, like not having some, detached presentation, but sharing your vulnerable process of talking about being an introvert and how that's changed your your whole perspective. So thank you. And everybody, as I always say in farewell, remember to go out in the world, share your story, live your purpose, and be a blessing. Bye, everybody.
Bye.